Hello everyone. So in today's film I'm going to be talking to you about skin tone and how to overcome any issue that you might have with skin tone. And I'm going to be making recommendations as to how you can appreciate your skin tone, how you can refine it, and how you can overcome any insecurity or doubt that you may have about the colour of your skin, no matter what it is. And today I'm drinking fresh mint tea. Most refreshing. But I'm not here today to say empowering statements or to preach any form of slogan. What I want to talk about is a functional recommendation that shall hopefully benefit you or be of interest. I think it is all fine to say, oh yes, confidence within your skin tone. Oh yes, it's great to be this colour no matter what colour you happen to be. However, we never really look at the reasons as to why there is doubt around these things. Why people have insecurity about the colour of their skin tone, no matter what it might be. Once we have an understanding as to why things are the way they are, why they are done, why is it this way, why is it that way, we have a greater gauge as to what to do about them. Now, I can't necessarily make the recommendation as to how to love your skin tone, but hopefully I will be able to make the kind of recommendations and explain things in such a way that it shall hopefully encourage you to discard the prejudice or disregard for whatever skin tone you may have. It may seem very strange to some of you who live in other parts of the world or in cultures where having skin as pale as my own is highly regarded. It may seem very strange to be seeing a film about how to appreciate pale skin or how to value it if you come from a culture where it is highly regarded. I do not, however, and I have lived in the western part of my world my entire life, where having very pale skin is not regarded as highly as having tan skin. And I'm going to talk to you about the reasons as to why. It isn't just a decision that just happens to be there. It isn't just a thing. There are reasons for everything. In some cultures in the world, it is desired to be very light-skinned and to have lighter skin, whereas having dark skin is disregarded. In other cultures, it is very desired to have darker skin, whereas very fair skin, like my own, is disregarded. There's always an element of hierarchy in everything, and certainly when it comes to social issues surrounding either gender or race, class, creed, economics, there's always an element of hierarchy involved, and this is very applicable when it comes to skin tone. In many places in the world, having lighter skin is seen as more desired. That isn't necessarily the case in the Western world. It comes very much down to hierarchy and what we associate with wealth, what we associate with power, we perceive to be better. What we associate with success, we always perceive to be better. It's like that thing when someone super successful comes along. You will want to hear what they have to say, to learn, to be successful, to be like them, to have greater prosperity. It is the same thing when it comes to skin. People always want to be like others who are more powerful or have more means or have greater resources. So there's always an element of hierarchy and emulation to achieve hierarchy. And in many places in the world, having lighter skin is something that is associated with class. For many centuries, the wealthy who didn't have to work outside would be indoors. Of course, their skin would lighten. Whereas if you were outside, your skin, of course, would be darker because it would be exposed to the sun and therefore you would tan. For many regions throughout the world, this was a great prevalence. However, in the Western world, what I believe very much changed it was the war, the First World War. And before the First World War, for centuries, having fairer skin was desired. Of course, if you were pale, if you were much fairer, you were seen as being of a higher class. It was the association that you didn't work and that you were indoors, that you had wealth, that you had money. You weren't a worker, you didn't have to be outside getting a tan, getting sunlight. You could remain indoors out of the sunlight. So there's always an element of hierarchy and power. Many things changed after the First World War. There were certainly tremendous amounts of social changes. Of course, after the First World War, many of these vast empires were changed or destroyed or reorganized. So there was a huge social change, and certainly for gender, women's rights, of course, changed. Women had to go to work during the wars and they were fighting for their rights. It was an era that was very exciting for women as there was a real progressive effort for women's rights throughout that period. And of course, during the 20s, if you look at the style that existed prior to the First World War, a lot of women were wearing long dresses during the Edwardian era. Yet after the First World War, they were wearing suit jackets and shorter skirts. And the hair was shorter, the hair no longer had to be very long, it wasn't really considered fashionable. Everyone had the very short bobs, very associated with the 1920s. And of course the makeup from that period, of course I find it very, very fascinating and very beautiful. And there was a huge cultural shift throughout the world during the 20s and the 30s. And of course, certainly lifestyle. So prior to the First World War, having fairer skin was desired. Yet after the First World War, that wasn't necessarily the case. I believe that the war caused Great Depression, and very few people talk about this. Very few people talk about what it has done to the psychology of the world, and particularly amongst the Western countries. Certainly within Europe, that was at war twice within the first half of the 20th century. War scars people. Any form of trauma scars people. War, of course, is unnegotiating in its ability for destruction. But one of the things that we saw after the First World War, certainly in Europe and of course in Northern America, where pale skin and where being really fair, like myself, was regarded, that changed. And again, it comes back to what is associated with wealth, power, money, status. There's always that underlining associations where people aspire to have these things, so they will emulate those with these things. So, if you had money, you could afford to go on holiday to an exotic place. You could afford to go off to the sun. So the fashion regarding skin changed. If you had a tan, this meant you had money. You could go on holiday, you could go to an exotic place and collect a tan and come back, and it became a status symbol. At first it was slightly rejected, but tanning became fashionable. I think a lot of the things that we saw during the 20s and the social changes were a result of what the war did and what the war caused. People wanted a new start, a new lease of life. It's understandable after going through anything that is traumatic. So people would be going on holidays more. The weather here during the winter, of course, I think probably everyone would regard as being quite ferocious. So going somewhere sunny and going somewhere where there's sunlight was desired. Of course, you could do this regularly if you were somebody that had the means to do so. It became a status symbol and a status association. So you can see that that's where the trend regarding pale skin changed. It became the opposite. However, in other parts of the world, it didn't necessarily have the same change. There were many reasons for that. Of course, again, there's a status symbol. You do tend to have lighter skin if you are indoors more, where you do tend to tan more if you are outdoors. That is applicable for everybody. I myself don't tan at all. If I were to go into sunlight, I would incinerate and burn. I've been avoiding the sunlight for 3,500 years. But my point is that in other places as well, because of colonialism and because the world has been structured in a way where Western countries were at the top of the hierarchy chain. Again, it comes to that thing where people emulate what they consider to be more successful or more powerful. You see that in many other cultures where there can be a desire to look more Western. And certainly when I meet other people from other cultures, of course London is a very coming and going place, so you meet people from all over the world all the time. I'm always struck by how contrasting the ideas are regarding skin when I meet foreigners who might come from cultures where somebody with skin as fair as my own is regarded. And I have to explain to them that in Western society and Western culture that being very fair like myself isn't regarded at all. Again, it comes back to the idea of hierarchy and class. Being tanned is considered more healthy. You look better. You look alive. I'm always receiving comments that I look dead. And I'm going to talk about my experience of being pale in just a moment. We must always look at the many layers throughout all the cultures in the world and why certain things are the way they are, why they've been structured the way they are. But the main reason that I wanted to make this film today is to encourage you to reject the concepts about skin tone and skin colour. I think the skin bleach industry and the tanning industry will not be very pleased about my recommendations and hopefully the influence that I will have in encouraging you to embrace and hopefully refine whatever colour your epidermis happens to be. So if I were to explain my experience of being pale, I've never been somebody that disliked my pale skin or had disregard for it. I've never been insecure about it, even though I grew up in a culture that doesn't regard it whatsoever. So I grew up in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, where there are many people that are just as fair as myself. Before I carry on though, when I talk about skin tone and skin colour, I don't use terms as simple as black or white. I never reduce people just to a term. I've never really seen anybody that is pitch black or white as paper, even though I'm not far off it. But I don't like to use these terms. I don't think they do full credit to what we are as human beings, and I don't really think that they encompass the full diversity that human beings are. Human beings are very complex. We're all different. We all come in different shapes, sizes and skin tones. I think very much because of the way that the world has been structured into nations and those sorts of structures, we always presume that one nation will have one ethnic group. That is definitely not the case. That is the case nowhere. And I think that even for the United Kingdom, for example, you have different ethnic groups. You have the Anglo-Saxons, the Anglos. Of course, where I come from, more people are Celtic. I myself am Celtic. That's why I look the way I do. There are countless different ethnic groups throughout the world. I'm always fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by human beings, how the differences in region have affected people to look a certain way. I find generally throughout the world, certainly for dark skin, very dark skin, there is a general disregard. But for very pale skin, certainly in the West, there is disregard, whereas in other places of the world where it is seen as being higher and better to be very pale, there is regard for somebody with skin as fair as my own. But definitely in the West, the very darkest of skin and the very lightest of skin don't tend to be considered. There seems to be an apparent disregard for the fact that super dark skin and super pale skin is exactly as nature intended. That is the way these things have been designed. I definitely consider society's warped ideals do tend to interfere with sense more so. Very often when you have super dark skin or super pale skin, there's always this presumption that you are editorial or that you're alternative or that you are making a political statement. I find the accusation and the insinuation that you are somehow making a political statement with your skin colour, I consider it to be very irreverent. As a matter of fact, I have always maintained the ability to orate. So much so, aged 11 I was awarded by the educational institution for which that I attended for my linguistic abilities. I can assure you, if one such as myself were to hold it to be a desideratum to release or declare a political statement, one would certainly do so without any qualms, inhibitions, reticence or hesitance. We never think of skin as being a biological technology. That's exactly what skin is. So for example, myself, I come from a region where sunlight is a scarcity. There isn't a lot of sunlight all year round. So my eye colour is designed to absorb as much sunlight as possible. My skin is designed to absorb as much sunlight as possible. So I don't react very well to sunlight in great amounts. A little bit of it is okay for me. I also find bright sunlight quite painful and it gives me a headache very, very quickly. I'm designed to live in the northern hemisphere of the world. That is what my design is. The skin has little melanin in it so that it can absorb the sunlight. So my skin is designed to process sunlight very, very quickly. If we were to look at somebody per se from Ethiopia that might have really dark skin and really dark eyes, there's a lot of melanin in the eyes and within the skin because it has been designed to process sunlight a lot slower. Nature has engineered human beings to suit the region that they live in. So someone that lives in Ethiopia has sunlight in abundance, so it makes perfect sense for the skin to have quite a lot of melanin in it, whereas it makes perfect sense for somebody like myself who's come from a certain part of the world where there is little sunlight to be the colour I am. So we must think of skin as a biological technology. It is a technology, it is biological, it is designed for the regions that we come from, have come from, or live in. All this complexity and diversity throughout the world, we're not always exposed to one another, and to think of the many different eye colours, the many different structures, the many different features, the many different colours. There is such variety and such complexity throughout human beings everywhere in the world. And what's even more fascinating, and I always think this is very, very fascinating, is that we only exist this one time. This one time that we exist. We are totally bespoke. We're a luxury, we're exclusive, we exist this one time. Then we transpire, and in the fullness of time, our life comes to an end. We all die in the end. It can be a little morbid to say, but we all do. We all go. In fullness of time, we all finish. We all serve our purpose. So I think that when it comes to embracing your skin tone, no matter how pale you are, no matter how dark you are, you must look at it in the context of what you have been designed for. Life is quite short and we have a limited time whilst we're here. We have a limited time to serve a purpose. We have a limited time to explore this realm. There are many interesting things within life. There are many things to see. There are many things to enjoy. Life is complex. There's the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. There is the dawn, the day, the dusk and the night. So we mustn't waste too much time concerning things that really don't need to be a concern. I understand that there are reasons why people have their insecurities, but you must look at it this way. An insecurity is something that you either overcome, or you accept, embrace and refine, or you continue to have it. I always think you either do something about it or you do not. I'm very much a functionalist. I like things done, I like things out of the way, I like things in order. And that is the recommendation that I would make, is that you make a decision about what you're going to do with your skin tone if you are struggling with insecurities around it. But I am quite pale, and I've always been a little bit more pale than most people. And I've received a lot of comments throughout my life that I think would be considered at times vulgar. I think one of the most oddest experiences that I've ever had was when I stepped onto the tube in London, the London Underground public transport. I know it might come as a surprise to know that I use public transport, but I see it this way. I'm doing my bit. It was around about New Year 2013, 2014, and I stepped onto the carriage and I was with my friend, and I was made up, as I am now, and some chap just out of nowhere shouted, "Someone's pale," in the most unsophisticated accent. And of course it was directed at me because I was the lightest person on the carriage. And I was in such shock. I didn't know what to do. I thought it was one of the most strangest, hilarious, yet inappropriate things. Probably one of the most strangest things I've ever had shouted at me. But I was so taken aback by it. I couldn't believe it, that somebody had shouted that. The carriage was full. Everyone just stared and looked. No one said anything. They all seemed a bit puzzled, for which they should have been. I was very puzzled. Imagine having that shouted at you. I mean, imagine if I had been dark-skinned, really dark-skinned, and somebody shouted, "Someone's dark," and it would have been perceived as being very inappropriate. Of course, there are historical reasons as to why that would have been perceived much more inappropriate than what that chap said directed towards me. But either way, it is disregard. Whether I had been super dark-skinned or super pale as I am, it is disregard. And it is a very inappropriate thing to say to anybody. I was of course taken aback. I've had other experiences where I've been accused of being Dracula, which is very rude, in public. I've walked into some establishments before and I've heard the term Antichrist muttered or shouted very loudly, which of course is very insulting, purely for the fact that, unlike most forces of darkness, I don't proclaim allegiance to the devil. That's awfully common. I operate independently. Besides, on the few occasions that I have been to hell, the decor is absolutely ghastly, so I never really stay for long. So I'm always very sure to return to the realm of the living quite swiftly. I always get accused of being a vampire as well, which I guess there is frivolity there, but it definitely has a vulgar undertone to it. Considering or calling somebody a vampire is the accusation that they indulge in mortals. I suppose that would be quite an acquired taste, but mortals aren't really my thing. So perhaps if you require inspiration about how to refine your skin tone, or how to create looks that are suiting for your skin tone, I have here on my YouTube channel a wide and growing portfolio of many different films that I've created on many different skin tones, and I can assure you I am committed to expanding that portfolio. Of course, as well, for a long time the cosmetics industry didn't cater, and I would still say doesn't fully cater, certainly for the very palest of skin. There have been many advancements and many efforts to create darker and deeper shades, but there hasn't been as much as an effort for the very palest of skin tones. So the very darkest of skin tones and the very palest, there does tend to be a scarcity of options when it comes to makeup, particularly for foundations and concealer. Sometimes you get the right shade and the right tone, but the formula can be not so great. Other times you get a great formula, it's the wrong shade or the wrong tone. So there is definitely a scarcity. I don't know how long for though, who knows? I might bring out a range of foundations for the very palest of skin tones. Refoundation. People always recommend to me as well that I should maybe try tanning. Would you ever consider tanning? Have you tried tanning? You know, what do you think you would ever try it? I wonder what you would look like if you were tanned. These are the sorts of comments I get quite a lot, and I simply reject them immediately. I think there's nothing wrong with tanning the skin or lightening your skin if it's done in an editorial context. I think it can look great. I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that within an editorial context. However, when it is an everyday thing where you genuinely feel uncomfortable about the colour of your skin, I just think though, is that your own insecurity, or is it one that society has forced you to have? If it isn't your own insecurity, and if you feel insecure about your skin tone and how other people react to the colour of your skin, regardless of the shade it is, I must make the recommendation immediately that you reject that idea that you are somehow less attractive for being whatever colour you are, simply because it's not fashionable within the society that you live in. At the end of the day, society's opinion isn't necessarily organic to you, it isn't necessarily your own. And besides, society's opinion is second-hand. The only thing one should ever accept that's second-hand is the crown jewels. I thought everybody knew this. But aside, I very much encourage and make the recommendation to others that they accept what they are. And then I think that once you have done that, you can then focus on refining it. And once you have refined what you are, my goodness, you will see the beauty in refinement. You will come to appreciate it more. When I've done some people's makeup that are pale-skinned, and I've showed them how to refine their pale skin, how to embrace it, and how to be very, very proud of it, at first I think they find it a bit daunting. Very often I receive gratitude in return, usually at a later date, for that. I feel very purposeful when others tell me that they are no longer using fake tan because of my work. I really like the idea of refinement, and taking what you are, or what you're doing, or whatever, and just making it better, rather than changing it. Make it better. That's what I say. I think that has always been my recommendation. It's not a slogan. We don't do slogans at the House of Maclean. We do recommendations. This is very relevant to skin tone and skin colour, but broadly speaking as well, you must be very careful about how much premium you put on the opinions of others. You must remember that human beings change their minds frequently. You must have a sense of distance to the opinions that other people say. Sometimes people are not always aware of how insidious or how divisive their opinion might be. Sometimes people aren't even aware of what they're saying or what it means. So always be very careful how much premium you prescribe to other people's opinions. Very careful. Another person's opinion isn't necessarily fact or defining off you. You define yourself. You define yourself. And then I make the recommendation that you refine yourself. You define you do you, and you refine you. It can be difficult, I know, to depend on yourself to give you the encouragement at all times and to give yourself the love and the nurture and the value that you require. You must be very careful when looking to others, looking to society, and looking to ideas and standards for validation of either your beauty or your worth. And always remember, you're a sentient creature. You exist this one time. Just take a moment to look back at yourself and think, goodness gracious, I'm fascinating, I'm wonderful. Because you do only exist this one time. You've been granted this body, this biological technology. Think about it, there are millions of cells at work right now, all alive, all living things, all living organisms, forming your totality of a physical being. That is fascinating. We must never discount and discard the reality that we are. So every single one of us, in all our variety and in all our colours and in all our shapes and sizes and ideas, are indeed valuable. You mustn't be afraid. You must confront your fear to embrace who you are. We live in a world that has been structured under the rulership of fear. I believe that that will change, and one day we will live in a world led by hope, led by thoughts and led by ideas. I will make the recommendation that you reject, discard, and get rid of any idea, way of thinking, standard that does not value you as a being or encourage you to be more on the basis of what you already are. That is what I shall say. I think to summarize, my recommendation would be to embrace, to refine and to enhance whatever it is you already are, be that very pale skin or very dark skin, or the vast in between. But I hope that you have found today's film either interesting, useful, beneficial, or helpful. And once again, thank you so much for watching, and of course, take care of yourself. Bye!